regrets, obviously. Get this started here.
I got it.
Great. I'm
3, 2, 1.
All right. Well, this is the special work session of the board for July 23rd. I'm going to call the meeting to order at 6:34 and need a motion for the approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Thank you, Wes. Thank you, Brandy. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. Appreciate that we're joined this evening by Spring Schmidt, who is the director for the County Health Department. Obviously, things continue to change in St. Louis County and the world. Even since our meeting last Thursday, we obviously had a lot of questions relevant to public health data and best practices, and so appreciate Spring. I know you're one of people right now, so thanks for making time to be with us this evening. Kind of have an open opportunity on the agenda for you to provide us some updates, as you know, obviously what we're deliberating this evening.
Yeah. And
Thank you.
Katie, I wanted to say a few things because Spring, thank you so much for seeing you again. She is also addressing some of the tasks that I was supposed to address in terms of metrics. And just to give you some background, so a lot has happened in many ways over the past week, and I've been busy working with the regional superintendents, and many of them are in the same place of trying to understand when it's safe to be in school and when it's best to be out. And so that group, the regional group, facilitated by Paul Ziegler from Ed Plus, really started to create a mock kind of dashboard looking at some other states to see how they're managing all of this in order to be in school. So we were able to look at something color-coded using data points that we currently have. And we looked at it yesterday. We all gave Matt Goodman, want to give him credit for this. He's brilliant, good guy. He put this together. It was a really clear, concise, slick presentation. And we gave him like all the blessings to move forward with the group that meets on Thursday. So it's all the regional health professionals to give us feedback on our best thinking, because you know we're not doctors, so we were trying our best to do the very thing that many boards have been asking. So I just wanted to let you know this is also a response to what you all have been inquiring about, like how we do this. Is this a thing that we can manage? You know, what do all the health professionals say about the work that we created? So Spring, it's all you.
All right, thank you everybody for this, and I just want to say that I have the deepest respect for what it is that you do. School, I have faced a lot of challenges, and our whole health department and the health officials that we've worked with have faced a lot of challenges over the course of this pandemic with all of the unknowns for this completely novel, doesn't even begin to cover the situation that we're facing. And I know that we're not alone in that around the country, but it also still feels very lonely in that. And I don't think there's anything that we have contemplated or thought about as hard or feels as momentous as the conversations that we're having around school. It's school, like it's a cornerstone of fundamentally of the things, everything that we believe in this space. And I know what it means to me, and I know what it means to our community. So I know that none of this is light. Metrics and their value is something that we spend a lot of time talking about and thinking about and looking at. And I have been asked so many times, and Sunshine a couple of times, to try to explain to the community what is the metric, like what is the thing that we can look at, the one thing that says what is safe or what is not safe. Are we okay to open? Are we not okay to open? Do we pull forward or move back, like in any of those pieces? And we have tried, and I have looked at nearly every state, every report, every scientific piece of information. We have scoured other, countries sort of looking for all these things, and we have set them for ourselves and said, we will look at these metrics and we will see 14 days of declining cases, until we didn't see 14 days of declining cases. But we did see like things flatten out and other things got better, but then certain things got worse. None of the metrics that we have been monitoring over the course of this have given us a perfectly clear sign that every one of us could look at and say, this shows that this is what we're clearly going in the right direction, or even a group of them together. It has been a constant practice of active reflection and expertise and discussion about how these metrics that we're looking at contextualize to what we're seeing in our community and the consequences of what we're changing or not changing as we contemplate every one of these moves. And I am well aware of how unsatisfactory those answers are to many people who are looking for certainty, and I wish I had certainty to offer. I wish I had it for our health department and for my staff and for others, let alone for our community and for others who are faced with decisions that you have too. So there are metrics that we look at, and the metrics that we discussed in the superintendent meeting this morning. I think it's a fantastic measure to be looking at what the infectivity rate is in your area. But I would be very concerned about consolidating the scale of the decision that you have to make and how many people it impacts to a single metric, because even with that way that metric faces right now, there are several school districts in the county that would automatically be closed based on the current infectivity rate. 90% of the rest of the school district and areas in the county would at a minimum be hybrid, sort of based on that. And because our cases are rising so quickly, the chances for every one of those schools, regardless of metric or whatever else was contextualized in the community, would have to close within the next couple of weeks, sort of based on those metrics would happen if you pick that single metric to be that. And that is not to say that metric isn't valuable. Every one of the metrics is valuable, but there's kind of I recommend sort of a Gestalt approach, in that you look at all of these different metrics of what you're seeing, because the consequences for what you have for your teachers, for the education of different sets of students within your population. So the metrics are also not, because they're so big and so broad, they can't be contextualized to different audiences. So it may mean something. There are differences in the rates of transmission for children under the age of 10 than there are for children 10 to 19. We are seeing, in the CDC is currently thinking that the kids over 10 have the same potential to have transmission at the same level as adults, and that they do tend to have higher rates of transmission back to their families than children who are not in school, or children who are younger. They think that children who are younger than 10 are only transmitting about half as effectively. And none of these metrics will equal guarantees. So these are very emotional issues. And I have faced this issue not just as like the health department director and the responsibility for the advice that we give to the community, but I have had to face this issue as an employer. And that has presented me with whole other challenges for my staff and their fear and their concerns for themselves and their families as well. And my staff are expected to be first responders in this, and most of them have never expected to be first responders before. So I really do understand sort of the difficulty of this, and it is a balance of the metrics that you look at, how those metrics contextualize down to the populations that you have, and how those metrics affect each population differently, because the consequences are different for different populations and can be weighed differently based on how those metrics affect them. And so that's just a little bit of the speech about the metrics that I gave today. And I know that we were, many of the other health officials, definitely the word of the day was that everyone was a little disappointed that all of us are, kind of felt like this. And they were very clear that they really felt like everyone really wanted to see this metric, and it is a valuable metric. So the infectivity rate for your area is currently around 5%, and somewhere between 5 and 8%. And that does have some options. It's not some of the worst that we see in the county, but it's not trending in the right direction either. So as we look to some of the things and we start to begin that contextualization, some of what we know about what's happening in St. Louis County right now is that I had over 320 cases in the last 24 hours. I am getting an average of 30 reports a day of positive cases between the ages of 10 and 19. I am getting an additional 5 cases. These are positive cases every day under the age of 9. I have 690 kids currently infected with COVID that are age 10 to 19, and another 181 that are, again, are 9 and under. We have been battling misconceptions about whether or not kids catch COVID. And granted, I have 300,000 kids in St. Louis County, so that might not seem like a lot when we are thinking about data points, except we are talking about kids. I will also say that in the adult capacity of this, adult transmission is rampant, and kids are not alone in schools. It takes all of the adults to make that work. And adult to child to transmission is common. It's more common, a lot more common than child to child transmission. And so all of these are the factors that we're looking at. There will be a new 2-week trend report, so we are trying to make sure that we are giving more actionable data, that is the things that we're seeing the most recent. So the data should be up on our website later tonight or first thing in the morning, but there are some different, we've been adding some geographical information. So you guys are in what we consider like sort of the central sub-county region for St. Louis County. You guys have the fastest rising rates and currently the highest rate of new diagnoses that we've seen in the last 2 weeks. So the cases are rising more specifically in your area because we have been seeing this change and morph over time. It has traveled around the county in different ways. It has affected some of our most vulnerable and disparate populations absolutely disproportionately, as almost every one of our health outcomes consistently does. Testing remains a challenge. So there is, greater availability for testing in St. Louis County than there has been throughout this entire epidemic. But we have been seeing challenges with some of the private labs and their ability to report and their ability to give people notifications back, which impacts our ability to do contact tracing and quarantining and any of the rest of those things. And so we are still seeing, you guys do also have one of the highest testing volumes in the central region by sub-county region. So there are a lot of people in your region that are getting tested, but children are the lowest group of tested individuals in St. Louis County. So we are just now, we look at markers that were set by, so again, the metrics. So we did look for metrics that were set by the federal task force that talked about what they expect to see in terms of how much testing is available per 100,000 in your population. And that's a sign of the adequacy. So we've been doing really great with that with adults. We're just starting to see us hit a little bit towards the adequate mark for the teenagers in that 10 to 19 population, but the under 10 population is nowhere near, they're not getting tested with the frequency that the rest of the age ranges of the population are. So there may be still yet untested levels of illness among our youngest kids. So it's hard to say that that's, that these are numbers, again, that we can definitively say this metric shows, what is safe or not safe for each of those kids. So that is what we are looking at. That's more local. That's more specific even to your area. I think there are some advantages to the central location. You do have opportunities for testing. There are some access points that are available nearby, and I think the volume of testing that we're seeing in the central region is good. That is what I want to see. I want to see lots of people getting tested. But the level of community transmission is really high. At the peak of the epidemic that we were facing back in certainly in April and May, what we were seeing was so many of our seniors, so many long-term care facilities with all of these issues, and that is not who is currently. I mean, not at all. Like those have gone down really dramatically. So many of those long-term care facilities have really done a good job with high levels of infection control. We have talked in the superintendent's meeting about each of the chances for protection, and there are mitigation strategies. There's no question masks help, especially if they're mandatory. And I know how hard that is for young children, and I know what position that puts teachers in to be in that level of enforcement for that kind of sort of constant behavioral thing, especially for that length of time. We know that distance matters. We know that time matters. We know that airflow matters, like all of those things. But I also know that all of those things are huge logistical challenges for the normal ways that schools operate. And right now, I also know that I'm relying on behaviors that require a significant amount of practice by hundreds of thousands of people in our community. And there is resistance to masks, and there is resistance to hand washing, and there is resistance to staying 6 feet distance from each other, and to practicing those measures in a way that keeps that transmission down. And all of those things are the challenges that we're looking at. And these are why I don't pick metrics, and why I have resisted really thus far that setting sort of these phased things and going forward. And I know phases help me plan, and I am a planner at heart, and I really want to have those things like at this, we will move to here. Except that as we watched this progress, everything everyone said the metrics would do, some of them did and some of them didn't. And then what do we make of that? And how did that apply to the consequences that we were facing in St. Louis? It takes at least 4 weeks, 2 full incubation cycles from what we've seen so far, for the curves to change. And our curve right now is rapidly rising. We believe that even if we get this level of community mitigation under control, we've done the mask mandate, but we haven't seen that have an effect yet. We are working on additional opportunities to add more protective measures without shutting down as much as possible, to be precise, to give the kind of guidance that helps us tailor where we can pull back to help decrease this level of transmission so that we can be safer, so that school could be safer. But it will take time for those to have an impact. And right now, the expectation is that we will probably rise for the next couple of weeks, which will push us even closer to the start of school. And then hopefully, some of these things will begin to trend downwards. But we don't know when that will happen, and we don't know how long it'll take. And I told all of the superintendents in March, I think in the first time that we met, that in all of this, there was so little that we knew about how this pandemic was going to play out, or what was going to happen to us, or what was going to happen, to all of the things that we were facing and reading, and that the only certainty that we would have is that we would end up walking through this together, and that we would do the best that we can. And unfortunately, it's been the only metric I could stick to, is that Karen can call me, and Roxana can call me, or any of you can call me, and I will be there, and I will do my best to answer the question with everything that I know at the time. And that was quite a speech, and I'm sorry about that, but please, ask me questions.
Well, can I just, before we start, Spring, I'm so grateful for you and your, it's kind of mushy answers, but it's straightforward with telling us where we are, because as sad and scary as all of it is, we need to know it in order to move forward. And I'm very appreciative, and you've always been so accessible. So I want to tell you, thank you for that. I really appreciate it. But one thing, and I think I know what you're going to tell me, but it's the management side. I'm thinking of my team. Lots of folks here thinking about, okay, the writing is on the wall. in terms of what we need to do next in order to keep everyone safe. But I'm curious, I know it may take time, but in your mind, what do you think it would look like to exit out of this really kind of crisis outbreak? What would you see, you know? And I don't want to hold you to it, but I know it's mushy and we shouldn't have mentioned it. But what does a mushy exit look like? Like what are you looking for with something like that?
Really good adherence to the behaviors, really good adherence to mask wearing, to hand washing and social distancing practices, so that the transmission rates get driven down by our behaviors. And we are doing those things that are necessary to keep from infecting others if we do happen to have someone that's out there that's asymptomatic, or that's pre-symptomatic and may turn symptomatic later but doesn't know that they're positive yet, but that they're kind of far enough away that they're not likely to engage that spread, that number of transmission lowers in the community, so that we're not infecting new people every time we have a positive case. Because right now, every positive case is infecting 1.5 more people, and that always equals exponential growth. We've got to get that back down. I think that the practicing of all of these mitigation behaviors, as we all get better at that and reestablish what new normals can be. And I think that that's where, we chatted a little bit about this earlier, and I think that innovation is a hard word to sort of wrap your head around right now, because we're sort of struggling to do that. But I do think that there will be new normals.
Mm-hmm.
And those new normals will look fundamentally different, and will have to look fundamentally different. I think that we will have impacts and fallout and consequences of this for a very long time. I think that we will have like transitions that we're practicing and adjusting, and then practicing some more and adjusting some more. I think that it will be that kind of transition back into not even back, but transition into what becomes a more habitual practice of school. So I think that there are populations that you can work with and think about how school could be different for populations whose consequences are going to be harder if they can't like do virtual learning or something along those lines. So the consequences are too high. So how do you work with that population? How do you work and protect like the next population as you get comfortable and your teachers get comfortable in practicing how to do something quite differently and still be education and still be like the core of those things? I think that it's going to require quite a bit of practicing.
Thank you, Spring.
Of course.
Spring, can you elaborate just a little bit? I mean, you did an excellent job. I really appreciate that overview, but the evolving nature of the data that's coming in, specifically as it relates to school and this pandemic, because you have a mixture of ages, you have adult teachers in the room, you've got 7 or 8 to 8 hours if it's an in-person setting, the way school as we knew it, and information that we're hearing like on rates of transmission for ages 10 to 19, for many lay people, I feel like that's relatively new data where kids were essentially thought not even maybe a few weeks ago to be much less susceptible to transmit. So, I mean, I would imagine this in your line of work, this makes modeling, this makes forecasting and extrapolating almost impossible, because we just don't have models that match what a school is. I think we have office ideas of what an office or a restaurant or a bar or some of those other things potentially. I know there's maybe international options that we can look at, but can you talk a little bit about that and how fast the data is changing as you try to make these models or make these sort of
The data is
extrapolation.
changing significantly week to week. Last week at this time, I was averaging, so for example, from a data perspective, we smooth the data out by averaging it over 7 days. So we don't say like from Wednesday to Thursday jumped 5 cases, therefore like it equals this. We average that data out over 7 days and we use that 7-day average number. So last week at exactly this time, I said that we had more than 20 kids in the 10 to 19 average per day. And then 7 days later, it's over 30. And so that's an average out over the last 7 days. That's how many kids that I had that were positive cases. So we do try to average those numbers out so that we don't get like just kind of a wild fluctuation in the data that says, okay, it's up one day and down the next. We also, the models, one of the reasons that they don't apply well to schools is because of the number of factors that you're talking about. So this is less well known for children. The most recent study that came out from the CDC came out a week ago, where they said that, and it was a study of 60,000 kids. It is an international study, but the CDC published it after validating it is a high tier study. So it is a high quality methodology that said that in 18% of the positive cases, the kids did transmit back into their home environment, and that they were more likely to have, and that is when the CDC out of that data definitively said that they put some other reports together that they also released in the last week and a week and a half that said that they do believe that kids transmit, at least in that older age group, transmit as effectively as adults. That is new information. There have been like suppositions about it and a couple of other things, but there have also been other reports that didn't quite set that, like where the CDC and the WHO and other researchers all said, yeah, teenagers can transmit as effectively as adults. So that does change the metric. I think it is the density in schools in that you have a lot of people concentrated in an indoor space. It is the amount of change. So one of the reasons I would think that this is different than like a business environment is that I can put barriers up between many of my workers. I can schedule them into different shifts. I can shift them over into different parts of the building. I do have some of them work from home and some of them work, in the space. I can require them to be in masks and things like that throughout the entire day. I can shift over like how many of them I shifted their lunch breaks so that they don't all take lunch break at the same time. Like I have more control because I don't have as much density and as much change over the course of the day. So they don't all, leave when the bell rings and enter the same different enclosed space with a different group of people. And so it really is all of that complexity that makes it so many more factors for what can happen in a school building to control in a model. Because models only, and somebody said to me once that all models are useful and all models are wrong, and that you can make models and you can give you some guidance, but they're really difficult to, and they only work really well when there are only a couple of factors that you're having to consider. So
Thank you.
mhm. What else?
Hi, my name is Nikila Tanasser. I have a question regarding the information that you gave us about having a matrix. Last week, we talked about having a matrix, thinking that would be helpful for us. But after hearing from you, I understand that it's not so helpful. And so I'd like to know what should we be looking at so we can go forward, or do we just need to call you?
So I keep my matrix. Keep your matrix. Like watch your variables. But I think when it comes down to it, it is often good people that sit around and look about what does this matrix mean to you in the context of what you're facing. How do you, in these roles of decision makers, like interpret this data, balance it off of each other, find out how to contextualize that to your buildings, to your teachers and your students. So keep your matrix. Don't throw them out. They're very helpful, but so is your judgment and your the heart and passion and the leadership that you bring to the roles that you've selected to be in here. Don't throw them away. I sit with doctors and I sit with infectious disease specialists and I sit with my nurses and I sit with you know, academics, and we say, okay, and we lay the data out in front of us, and we get in groups like this and we talk about what we think it means. We balance each other out. We query each other. We argue with each other. We debate, and we talk about what do we think is right? What do we think will work? What do we think matters most to St. Louis County? How do we make this happen?
So,
And
so for example, to speak to Kylan's point, so Ed Plus is working on that.
Mhm.
Karen Hall's not going to do that. They created this, and it's more like a dashboard. Would you say that's a good piece of information to speak to what you said and Kylan saying for decision making? Do you think that's a wise decision, like moving forward for consideration for deciding, you know, which way we want to go, which scenario we want to go in for our kids?
I do. I think that you, again, you look at that, but you balance it with your judgment and what you
Make
think
the community.
is right for your community.
Yeah.
I also I seek input from people in the fields. So I sought like these conversations with school superintendents and made sure that we were participating in them so that I could hear like how the decisions we would make would affect and how what that expertise was that matched up with mine and what I was hearing from my staff. So keep your matrices, keep your metrics, look at those, but
Mhm.
you will balance them, and I think you balance them with really constructive conversations.
So Spring, I would say that's exactly the process we have tried to use. We've had work teams, we sit on teams across the state. We've been at your briefings and lots of things. One of the challenges that we have had as we sit and debate what we think we're seeing is that the data that I have to report is what I can see from the public facing data pages. So can you talk a little bit, because what I'm noticing is there is lags in data, and what I'm hearing from staff and parents are concerns about underreported data. So everything you just said, I feel 100% confident that we are doing on an hour by hour basis, trying to think our way through this.
Of course.
But I am really struggling with how to know that what I'm looking at is current, or even sometimes what it means for us specifically when it is aggregate county data. So can you talk about that just a little bit?
So it is difficult in the data lags. So I don't know if it's really possible to sort of characterize the fact that all of the reporting things that we're looking at started with paper. There was no process or system that collected any of this information at the beginning of this pandemic, and there still is no central process that does it. So for what we see in St. Louis County, all of it is stuff that we had to build so that we could represent the data that we have. The 2-week reports are our most current data. We do give them every 2 weeks, and we've organized them into indicators, and we've been trying to improve them. So this week you will see some geographic pieces up there, and that'll be up either later tonight. I think I just approved it about an hour ago. So I did give you a preview of something that will be up later tonight or first thing in the morning. So we are trying to provide that that closer to the real-time context of what it is that we're seeing. There are other pieces in terms of like, what does this data point mean, that I would recommend that you call for. And there are pieces that like the hospitals have and put out there. We have some of that information, but we don't always have as much as they do. So the Pandemic Task Force does often characterize some of that as well. And most of the rest of the data we also try to represent on a daily basis on our website, to put some of that up there. And then certainly we've looked at hundreds of data sources all over the country, and there are lots of lags and lots of variations in who reports what to whom. I can say that because we mandated the reporting that comes to us, it is the report that I have the most control over in trying to find something that's the most recent or the most actionable. And so we're trying to get more geographic. We have data suppression rules for when there isn't enough in like a particular area or something like that. We're really not facing that problem a lot anymore, until we get down to like children, where we don't have enough in the county of positive cases in the under 9 to say geographically like where they're all located, because then it would be too easy to potentially identify individual children, which we don't do. And so that kind of stuff we have to work with sometimes. So we do try to put some of that stuff out there, because we are looking at these metrics a lot. So if you have a question about something, like definitely reach out.
Thank you very much.
Anything else that I can answer for you guys? Karen?
Yes.
I have all the questions. Go ahead,
I have
Ralph.
a question, Spring.
Yes, sir.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
I appreciate all the information you just gave us, but I was kind of concerned about when you're saying that we starting to have a higher rise of young people test positive. Are these young people having different type of symptoms than adult would have? And if so, are they being admitted to a hospital or being in an intensive care unit? Or is there a quarantine period that a child would have to go through that might be different than from an adult?
So the quarantine for a child is exactly the same as an adult. What we do know, both from the data nationally and internationally, as well as from what we have seen, is that the children's symptoms tend to be more mild. So this makes it, I think, a particular challenge for schools in that they're less likely potentially to be running a fever. They are less likely potentially to have the more severe cough or difficulty breathing. So the symptoms can be lighter. Now, that is not to say that children have not been in ICUs and that children have not died from COVID, because they have. It is not as high as the adults at all. And so that's not to say that, and I don't think that they are at the highest risk. They're relatively low risk for ending up in the hospital. And many of them are more likely to be asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic. So they don't show as many symptoms as the adults do. They do go through the same quarantine as the adults. And because of what they're saying now about that transmission, so they do think that the younger children do not transmit, so they're not as likely to infect someone else. But if the older children are as likely to infect someone else as the adults are, then they are at the same level of risk for spreading transmission, even if their symptoms are milder.
So when you say older, are you starting at age 10? Is that what
Yes.
you mean?
Yes, and I'm well aware, and we're also quite frustrated that that's a really big age range. And it's not an age range that's helpful for schools, because there's no natural break at that particular age range by grade or
Yeah.
anything like that. And we use that predominantly because the CDC does.
One more question concerning this. As we get more into the fall of the year and we kind of deal with the common cold and the flu, is there a big distinguishing that we should be mindful about to see if a child may test positive for the virus, or they may just have a common flu virus?
They will all look like COVID. They will all look like they have the coronavirus. I highly recommend the flu vaccine for all kids, because that will help eliminate the potential that it's flu that you're seeing, because we do, have a lot of flu in St. Louis as well, and certainly colds go around, and especially as the weather changes, and there are many people with allergies, and there are people with stomach troubles. Now that the CDC is adding additional pieces like stomach difficulties or diarrhea and some of these other symptoms, the symptoms are now so wide for COVID that, especially for children, because from a health perspective, almost every younger child in particular just presents with a stomach ache, regardless of what they're actually suffering from. Children frequently say whatever it is they're feeling is a stomach ache. And it will be, you won't be able to tell until they get a test. So if they test for the flu and they've got the flu, that will eliminate them. But if they test for the flu and don't, they'll still go through COVID testing.
And can you remind us, what's the window for the flu?
So it generally starts, it's been shifting a little bit over the last couple of years, but we generally start to think of it towards, we start really pushing vaccine towards the end of September, getting into October, and then it sort of goes from there. But it has been shifting a little bit earlier and then a little bit later in the last couple of years. We've had a couple years lately where we've had more than one wave of flu. But September and October is when we really start ramping up, recommending the vaccines.
Yeah, it's just me trying to plan yet again.
Oh, I
put shape around all this.
How easy is it, this is Brandy Miller, how easy is it for children to get tested right now?
So I think that the access is increasing, but there are still difficulties with testing, and that it sort of depends on where you go. So many people can, if they have a doctor and the doctor makes a recommendation for a specific place to go, so there are increasing, and I think the access is as good for children as it is for adults if they get taken. It is mostly hospitals, for example, tend to base their testing criteria more on symptoms for their patient population. But most of, certainly the health department, the federally qualified health centers, many of the other urgent care or primary care facilities that are testing are not quite as focused on people that are heavily symptomatic. We test on a wide range of criteria, and does not have to have symptoms.
Spring, please forgive me if this puts you on the spot, but I just want to ask directly about the start of school. We are scheduled to start school in August, and based on what you have shared with us about cases rising in our area, I would just like to know, what would your advice be?
So I have said this verbally to the superintendents, and I know that Dr. Page has also sort of given his opinion. I think that for the start of school, because it will be so difficult to turn this tide prior to that time, and we believe that the cases will still be rising, we think that virtual options, at least for the beginning, are the most protective. We think it can be done to add protections in. So we're definitely not knocking any of the school districts that are, or any school districts that's planning different opportunities, because I think we have to figure out what we're capable of doing. But we have been recommending that virtual is a good way to start.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Go ahead, Katie.
I was gonna move us along, so go ahead, Wes.
Oh, okay. Spring, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it. It's been very informative to me, and I'm sure everyone who's listening. I had one question. When you look at this from the standpoint of those 7-day moving averages you were talking about, how many consecutive 7-day moving averages of decline would you feel comfortable with saying you can move from one tier to another? Is there any number that would you want to hang anything on that?
No.
Okay.
It,
All right.
it's why I refused to set phases from the beginning. Nothing as an individual metric will be good enough to tell us for sure. And so I will watch, I will cheer when we have multiple 7-day moving, you know, in the declining direction. But given what has happened as we have been reopening and as the country has been reopening and how fast it moved across the country, and spread and out of control in community transmission, I don't know that there's a number that I could definitively say, we'll watch them, we'll sit down, we'll debate and talk about them, and that's what we'll communicate at the time. It's
Okay,
not
great.
predictable enough.
Thank you very much for clarifying that for me. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you all for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
coming.
Yeah, thank you, Spring.
I wish it
Appreciate
was more certain. I know that I'm an educational psychologist by that's my background, my training. And like, we are data driven, and I know. Yeah.
So you're killing us. You know that, right?
Uh,
Left and right, backward and forward.
You are.
all
Yeah,
you can-
we're not
all you
alone.
can do is
Yeah, I
speak
know.
your truth. All you can do is speak your truth. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I don't give platitudes, and I know that that's not, you know, comforting, but is as honest as I can be.
Mhm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So then I guess moving on to our revisiting of some of the conversations from last week. Obviously, there has been some additional MRH data points gathered. I know that we obviously have over 100 people watching right now, and know that many more than that have shared their just their hearts and souls really with us through emails to the board and administration, through comments on Facebook, through one-on-one phone calls, through town halls with staff, I believe. So instead of going through all of those many data points, I think what is hopefully fruitful this evening is to talk about how what was presented last week may be improved based on some new intelligence and some new learnings and listening that have happened. So Karen, I'm not exactly sure if you're going to lead this part, but
Yeah, I'm happy to. I'm unable to get my presentation up. Thank you, Chris. Can I do it now? Okay. Thank you. Hold on a second. Just a second. All right. So, yes, a lot has happened in just short 7 days and what's going on in the community. And what we wanted to do is revisit the two phases, the tier 2 and tier 3, with some additional considerations and also some additional work that we've done. And then just the preliminary survey results, kind of what we see right now, that people have taken the time to respond, and I appreciate that. And then lastly, to just capture the next steps for the board, thoughts and considerations, just captured in the very last slide. So it's just 5 slides and we'll be very brief, but just to think about really what we're trying to do. And it's interesting to hear what Spring is saying, like models don't work. You have to practice. Like all of those things are so true for what we're trying to do with this time period that no one has experienced before, and what we're trying to do in order to do what's best for kids. So when we look at our revisiting our response and our planning, we are looking at tier two and tier three. And really, if you can think about this, it's the whole experience that we have to consider long-term. We're going to be in this for quite a bit of time, and we don't necessarily know what the community spread is going to look like, because we started our planning in May thinking things would flatten, it would get better. And we wanted to ensure the new way of learning could be responsive to that based on all the information and the guidance that was coming out. And then we thought tier three, well, if there is an outbreak, which apparently we are living one right now, the beginning stages of it, this is how we can respond in a tier three experience. So what you're going to hear, and I'm going to direct this to Roxana, with the different things that we've been working on in a week's time, an update, and just some more information, because it is a lot of information to kind of process and then think about. And then also thinking more that tier three is our reality, some details that we have for that as well. And then lastly, just open it up for discussion, and then think about for the board next steps and things you have to consider as we move into the start of the school year, some additional planning. So Roxana, can you kind of elaborate here on what we're thinking about for the blended learning considerations?
Absolutely, but I think it will make more sense to them if I start with tier three and move backwards.
Absolutely.
So if you could go down a slide. So again, as we're thinking about this and looking at all the data and the data that's shifting, tier three is essentially virtual instruction for all of our students. And so what that basically means is we have to consider our platforms and our training. We will have It's Learning running. We have identified our distance learning coaches, for lack of a better word. Every grade level and every department has coaches that are designated. We are doing a lot of distance learning training. We're using a resource from Doug Fisher, Nancy Frey, and John Hattie called the Distance Learning Playbook, which is all research-based strategies around what good instruction looks like. I've already met with faculties in 2 of the buildings. I'm doing 2 more tomorrow, where we're going through those components, and we literally are listing out, what do we do when we're in person with kids? All right, what can we do virtually? What did we did that worked? What didn't we do because we didn't have the resources, and how can we do it better? And in part of those conversations, we've also had focus groups of administrators and teachers. We have identified virtual learning resource, which we are very pleased with. The vendor is called Schools PLP. We have some more demos that we want to do, but the reason that model is attractive to us is we can pay a per pupil cost for all pupils. Any student that would want the MOCAP option that we've been talking about, which would be all virtual all year, can be in that model. For parents that have told us that what we're providing, their kids need more, there's actually a self-paced component of that we could also assign to students. And for our teachers who are using our regular curriculum, we can pull pieces out of that and move it into It's Learning. So we have 3 functionality with that, which will serve us well in a blended model, but we'll make sure that all of our learners are covered. And that they remain with MRH teachers with lots of options. So that's a new thing that has come available to us. Actually, I knew about it the last time we talked. I didn't have enough information. So we're pleased with that find. The preliminary teacher and administrative panels are very hopeful. It looks really good. We have just a little bit more work to do on that, but that is a better option than the option that I have come to the board saying we're going to need. So that all is in place as well. We also have been working on social emotional supports because we know that we have a lot more kids. When you look at the research on who's at risk in virtual learning, we know that number's wider. And I discussed some of those components with you last time and some things that were weighing heavy on our minds. I am pleased to say that we have developed a partnership with SEAD, which is Social, Emotional, and Academic Development. It's a grant, and they are going to partner with us. We'll get about $150,000 in services, primarily to help us train our classroom teachers in terms of how to notice and how to build into regular instruction supports in a virtual environment, but also to help us with technical problem solving and help us to think about how we move forward. So that's something we're very pleased about. We've also started conversations with principals in particular, and obviously the board wants to have conversations, but if we do have opportunities to bring smaller groups of students on campus, practice behavior, and do additional supports for our most vulnerable students, I think there's high interest in doing that, and we have some ideas about what that might look like. In addition, we're thinking about intervention. So I know that Ben Gleason has been part of all of the training that we've done. The SSD folks are working really hard to figure out how they interface and how we can streamline some of the virtual services for our SSD students and families. We know it was very challenging for them in the last environment for a variety of factors, and we are leveraging those. We also learned some things and have been working with principals about how to deliver intervention services one-on-one and in small group through our platforms. We do have, the tech team spent a lot of time this summer looking at the Zoom enhancements, so we will be able to use Zoom with our instruction for students, which is great. That was a huge barrier for us last time, but because of lots of safety considerations, we didn't do that. So that's a win for everybody. So we're doing that. We've also purchased swivel cameras for teachers, so that makes live streaming lessons much easier. It makes recording lessons a lot easier. I won't go into, I could talk ad nauseum about the components of virtual instruction that we're training on and how we're trying to make sure that those pieces are blended into an integrated approach so that kids get what they need in a variety of formats that are more specialized to the types of services we would provide in a classroom setting. Obviously, that's a learning curve for us, but I think that we have the information that we need. We have the teams that we need. Right now, teams are working, taking information from initial trainings back, gathering information. They will be bringing back suggestions and requests for additional training. We've also talked about training videos for parents so that they know how to use the technology, particularly for our very youngest learners who can't access it themselves. And so that's very much in the work. Our librarians have stepped up and we'll be making a lot of those tutorials, if you will, particularly in our early childhood center in terms of how do you use the Chromebook and how do you access its learning, how do you use the reports in its learning, those kinds of things. Staffing continues to be a challenge. So we do have adequate staffing to do virtual learning. And I think that we have staffing to make sure those things run. What the challenge that we have for staffing in virtual learning, as we found out last time, was we do have a large percentage of our support staff that if kids are not in school, don't necessarily have things to do. So we will have to have further conversations about how we repurpose those folks, and some of the decisions that you help us make about who can be on campus and under what conditions will help me better able to talk to you about that. I have gone through each employee group. I've looked at what their job descriptions are. I have looked at how we use them through the last closure. This will not be an easy decision for us. And I want you to keep that staffing issue in mind in a virtual environment, because while we may need fewer staff members in a virtual environment, in a tier 2 setting, we actually need more support staff members. So we have to be really careful. It's not simply a matter of furloughing and then hiring more. We've got to look at, Spring did a good job of talking about flattening an average. So I have to think about that in terms of staffing too. Under what conditions do we need more staff? Under what conditions do we need less? And how do we maximize that while also protecting our employees who've been long-term employees, because that's what we do. We care very much about our people. So
Roxana,
yes.
In an all virtual environment, who would you imagine we wouldn't be able to have meaningful work for?
Well, I will tell you a few groups that I will tell you a few groups where we have some challenges. Discover Club comes to mind, because if we're not having before and after care, last time we kept them busy, we did a lot of training. We had them do a lot of lesson development. We had them do a lot of things to prep for this year. Those tasks have been completed. That's not to say that we might not be able to find others, but that's one group that's on my heart. We also, depending on what kind of use is happening in the buildings, if we're bringing staff back in the buildings into classrooms to teach, even though kids aren't here so we can practice, then we probably need our B&G staff. If the buildings are not being used at all, then we have certain things that we have to do, but then once those things are done, if we're not taking on large scale projects, that's a group that we want to look at. And there are a few other groups. For example, in our buildings, we have multiple secretarial staff. We can find work for them to do, but again, depending on what's happening, like our attendance secretaries, we're not necessarily taking attendance in the same way. I don't want to call out groups because I don't want to call out panic, but I'm just saying this is something we have to think about.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, the skill sets would have to line up, but I mean, I think, again, the board, I will be so bold as to speak for folks and certainly chime in if not, but I am willing, if staff are willing, to be creative. I mean, from what I understand, Discover Club workers are some of the most beloved by our, youngest kiddos. Why not repurpose them to just do one-on-one check-ins or, things like that. So again, I know that's not the job description those folks were hired for. They may not be, down with being repurposed in those ways, but I would hope that we can unprecedented times with some unprecedented job descriptions.
Well, I love to hear you say that. That makes my heart warm. And we can certainly be creative, but again, I'm just telling you that these are the management and staffing decisions that we have to make collectively.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that, Katie. And I think the rest of the board probably is very supportive of that, because we don't want to be presumptuous in thinking that that's something right away. And we want to make sure that we roll everything out to you all, and we're very transparent about some of the changes that needs to happen. So that's why we're putting that there. So thank you for your support.
Yeah. And I mean, I do think it's important to highlight the impact that will have on the ability to transition from one tier to another.
Yeah, incredible.
Sure, lay off all the bus drivers, but how quickly can we really rehire bus drivers?
You cannot.
You can't, and that's why I'm stating the obvious.
Yes. So sorry, any bus drivers that are listening, I wasn't.
Yeah, I know. We love you.
Yeah, this is not a
what I want to say. I love all my staff.
Everybody.
Retain all my staff. Yes.
Oh my gosh. So you heard it. We're working on it. But it was important that we had to be clear that things are changing radically, especially if we're starting in this capacity. Roxanne, are you ready for 3 or any more questions?
I believe I am, but one thing I do want to point out here, as you heard Spring and Karen say earlier, situations may change rapidly. And obviously for a lot of reasons, we want to have kids back. So I do want to say that I do think it's still important for us to have some parent meetings and try to get a handle on which parents may want kids to stay out for an extended period of time. Because if that is their option and they never want to be back on campus for a semester or a year, then I need to know that, because of the platforms that we're purchasing to help us with this, we are going to have to pick some options that we believe are best in the educational best interest for that particular family scenario. And I think it's important that we explain what that looks like and why they might need to choose some things. This product allows us to move kids in and out quickly. So in some of the other scenarios and things we were looking at, we were saying parents would have to make a choice that would be a solid choice for a semester. I don't necessarily think that's still true in terms of the products that we're looking at, which is good because based on parent feedback and based on student feedback, we know how much our community loves our teachers and wants to be part of what MRH has to offer. I want that too, but I also don't want to set our staff up or our parents up by promising things that humanly a single teacher who has 5 preps can deliver, if that makes any sense. So we want to give families options. We want to talk through what the options are, and we want to be really clear. Again, we're a small district and our staff have highly specialized certifications at the secondary level. In a larger district, we could work the numbers and the averages and maybe pull out a teacher to make them a virtual teacher only. Whereas I'm thinking of our business teacher who has 6 preps. She teaches 6 different classes a day. She can't do 6 different classes in 3 different formats. That's just not acceptable. So in a case like that, if a student wanted an all-year virtual option, we would be looking at course opportunities through MOCAP that could be largely self-regulated, and they may check in with her periodically, but would give her the ability to manage those multiple modalities, if that makes sense. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that, but I do think that's important to mention, that's part of what we're trying to do.
Roxana,
question. I'm sorry, Karen, I have a question for Roxana regarding what you just presented. Thank you, Roxana, for looking for another way for children to be able to go in and out of the school with ease. I appreciate that. My question about that program is, are the children able to see their teacher, or is this just something that, I see you nodding your head yes, so I'm just going to be quiet and let you answer that question.
Yes. Well, I'm going to say it depends. Okay. So at the elementary level in K through 6, a teacher would be managing that virtual coursework. And of course, they're going to do that, right? At the secondary level, a teacher may be managing it and they may be able to meet face-to-face, or for some kids, there's a self-paced option. And if they pick the self-paced option, they will largely be working through, we have Odysseyware in the district, we've had other programs. So it's more like a virtual correspondence course. Now, that is not to say they can't contact our teachers, that we can't be providing additional supports to them while they tackle it, but a teacher might not be managing that course with face-to-face presence every day. Does that make sense? So it really depends on, at K through 6, yes, they will see their teacher. We will have a virtual teacher who checks in with them because young children cannot manage that coursework. Okay, at 7 through 12, it will be more blended with students that can manage it, probably working through independently or as independently as possible with access to our counselors and our teachers as they need it. I hope that answers your question.
I have some follow-up, bear with me. So with the K through 6, there is concerns with the ability for the child to be able to do the work on their own. So can you speak to that? And I'll let you speak to that, and then I have a follow-up question if no one else has any more questions.
So I actually just did distance learning training with our ECC teachers this morning. And we feel that this will be the most challenging age group to work with in a virtual environment. We know what good quality instruction looks like, and those same elements are what has to happen virtually. What puts early childhood students at risk in a virtual environment is most of them are just learning to read. And so they cannot access text. And they also often cannot produce work or submit work by themselves virtually. And that creates a lot of access barriers because I don't want to give you a lecture here and I don't want this to go on too long, but teachers get growth in students by teaching in their zone of proximal development, which means we're always teaching just a little bit higher than the kid can do independent work, right? At the secondary level, we can mitigate that a little bit by giving them resources they can access, and then having teachers give feedback and dialogue, usually written, sometimes through video at the secondary level. At the elementary level, kids need constant feedback. And the way that teachers are used to doing that is in-person, one-on-one support. So they will give individual instruction. They will do small group strategy group instruction. They are trying to build self-regulation skills. They're trying to work on self-efficacy and how kids feel about themselves as a learner. All of these are developmental concepts that teachers do naturally because they pay attention to what students are doing, they notice them, they take notes on what they're doing, they give feedback, they write reminder notes to themselves of what to say to the child the next day to move them forward. Everything I just said, you can see, is a challenge in a virtual environment when kids can't necessarily access the technology themselves and cannot read written feedback and cannot submit necessarily written feedback. So to speak to that, Nikki, what we're doing, whether we're in a tier 2 blended or whether we're in a virtual, we have to design an integrated package of virtual experiences, if you will, that meet those needs. And so what that might mean is we're doing a video lesson that we want you to watch. And then we might have a read it section where we have some materials, whether they're pictures or reading, that we want you to access. And then we might have a gaming section where you're doing some kind of interactive experience that lets you practice skills, but also gives us data back through the program about where you are. And then we might have a problem solving section. And then we might have to do a Zoom where we do a small group learning piece, or we might have to Zoom with an individual student and family. And then we have an independent practice, something you do that we can see to know where you are. And at the very end of that, we have to do some kind of summative assessment that tells us whether or not you met the standard, because that will become the information that we use in the next segment of learning. So you can see that that's very involved. I think the teachers, I'm so proud of our teams because MRH teachers step up every time we ask them. But I think the fear right now is not what to do. I think we know what to do. It's not even necessarily how we do it. We feel like we have tools to do it. The fear right now for teachers, at least the feedback I'm getting, is how will we have enough time to do this well, right?
Do you have an idea of how much time you need?
Well, I don't know that it's an easy answer. Again, if you're doing it in person, it's intuitive and it's on the fly. I think the time piece comes in that you're having to create new material that doesn't currently exist for us necessarily, particularly at the early level. We have to get used to using all the tools. So you all know when you learn new tech, it just seems more time consuming. And then after you become a proficient user, you don't even think about it. We're having to do a lot of collaborative behind the scenes work because just like this decision is for you all, no one of us can make it. Some of the decisions that we're making about what we need is trial and error. So we learned a lot during summer school, and we learned a lot in the last bit of engagement. But, and I do think some of what I'm hearing as it becomes more normal for folks will go away. But I do think there's a very real, and I want to speak on behalf of the staff because I've heard this consistently across grade levels, our staff want to do the very best job that we can for kids and families. And so they know what they're able to do in person. This is an unknown, right? And they don't want a kid's success or lack of success to be because they aren't immediately up to speed on the skills, or that they're trying to do so many things in a day that they're not doing any of them well.
Roxana, this sounds though like an awesome opportunity to bridge the gap. We've got a gap here, right? That's still been consistent. We haven't been able to figure out how to bridge that barrier between, our students that are learning well and those students that are struggling. We're talking about incorporating new ways of learning, new ideas, new concepts, and the ability for kids to review some of these videos, not necessarily at their leisure, but go back over it. So whereas in the classroom, you see a lesson once, You got it or you don't, right? Then you try to follow up with the teacher. And again, we still have the issue of, is the teacher going to be able to have the time to do that? But now not only can you view it more than once, but then your parents can get involved. And if they need to view it at after hours, right, when a teacher wouldn't typically be available, wouldn't that be available to them now based on the new plan? So
Yes.
to me, I'm hearing an opportunity. We don't know how it's going to go, but an opportunity to potentially bridge the gap for our learners that are struggling. Is that?
Well, we are absolutely trying to look at it that way, and I have groups of teachers who are very excited about even what we learned last time and the potential for the technology to assist us. So we're planning on being all blended all the time. There might be a time when it's mostly virtual, but even if we're back in school in a tier 2 or even a tier 1 setting, we plan on using the technology because we need to. We need to practice it, and we need to use it for the reasons that you're saying. That does not mean that, you know, new skills don't come with anxiety and stress. And that does not mean that we have to learn. One of the things we talked about today is who's at risk in a virtual environment, right? Well, we can say who's at risk, but we have to learn through trial and error how to mitigate those risks in ways that are meaningful in our context and our community. And so what I'm hopeful about is in the 2 groups that I have completed our very first conversation and training, actually trying to implement the plan, they were so energetic and let's group together and let's think about how we can divide and conquer this, and let's think about how we can organize this in ways to make things happen. So I wish you could have been a fly on the wall, because I'm very proud and very pleased of our teachers and how they're stepping up to try to meet this challenge.
Can we get, I feel like I'm struggling a little bit because I feel like we're using some euphemisms here that not everybody may be using in the same ways.
Sure.
I've heard a lot, I think, from the emails and communications that we've received from community about worrying about those folks in our community who are most at risk. Mm-hmm. And I don't believe that term is being used in the same way across, you know, all of the communications that we're receiving. I would really challenge us to think about risks in ways that we typically, when we're thinking about schools and education equity. I know typically when we're talking about equity, we're talking about our brown children performing dramatically, you know, under the white kids in school, and you know, looking at that map data and disaggregating the map data or the other formative assessments that we have. In this case, I think we're talking about some different risk because school, as it was happening, wasn't working for a group of kiddos. We know that. We were trying to implement some strategies to mitigate that risk. Fast forward to now, school as we used to imagine it is not going to work for a different group of kiddos and adults for some different reasons now. I just want to, as much as you could, Roxana and Karen, to articulate who you're talking about when you're talking about being at risk.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Okay, so I won't go through the whole list that we looked at today as we're strategizing what we need to do in developing lessons. But what we are talking about here are some things that are on the list of from the research about who can be, quote, at risk in a virtual environment. Right, any student who has gaps in literacy or numeracy at grade level, so non-readers. Students who typically don't work at grade level. We can mitigate that by instructional design to some degree, but if you are not a strong reader and you're in a virtual environment, that automatically is going to be a bigger struggle for you. Students who don't self-regulate, and by that I mean students who have a hard time staying focused and staying organized. typically don't do as well in an all virtual environment. That means you have to have mitigation strategies in partnership with parents to try to work around that. Students who have low, I don't want to say that way. Students who don't see themselves as strong learners often suffer in a virtual environment. In a classroom with a teacher, teachers are constantly cheerleading for kids and helping kids believe that they can do more. In a virtual environment, that is not happening with nearly the frequency or as personalized usually. And so that can become a problem for that group of learners. We can mitigate that, but we have to be mindful of it. Obviously, our students with social emotional stress and anxiety, that can become problematic in a virtual environment. So those also need supports. And the list is a little longer than that, but I think you see what I'm saying. So what we would, you're exactly right, Katie. What we traditionally would have thought of as at risk, that pool gets broader in a virtual environment. And that doesn't mean that we're helpless to it or that we can't do things to mitigate it. It just means that we have to be mindful of it and we have to build it into our instructional design. The word that I kept using with teachers this morning was it has to be baked in to our integrated learning plan, right? So we have to think through things we would do without even thinking in person. We now have to be thoughtful of and plan for it in advance in a virtual platform. And that is a new skill set for teachers. But as Randy said, it's also an opportunity. We just have to think through it, and it's going to be time consuming early on.
And, you know, to that end, as much as I would wish we could get into a tier 2, I mean, the census and the data seems to be moving us more towards that tier 3 and all virtual environment, at least in my personal opinion and what we're seeing. And I wonder, though, about those mitigation strategies, what tier 3 seems to be a big challenge for, specifically at the start of a year when we have educators who haven't met some of the students that they're going to be teaching and the families and the parents. You know, that rapport seems to be an important piece to, you know, at least last spring, as much as that was emergency management of just going into a virtual environment, there was at least 3/4 of a relationship to some extent that had been built up there. Can you talk a little bit, and first of all, I appreciate in the short time since our last meeting, the delving into these, particularly tiers 3 and 2, about these supports. I think it's thoughtful work and I appreciate that tremendously. But can you talk about what could we be doing, either from a schedule, from a creativity? We would have buildings that essentially would be empty. Is there safer or distance opportunities for some in person, even in a tier 3, to at least begin the school year or the process to begin that relationship in some capacity?
So thanks for that question. A couple thoughts. We are trying to be very intentional about our home visiting this summer. So we are doing virtual home visiting. We may be doing more than one if warranted. We also, now that Zoom is available, we're very excited. So there's a number of class building. We do cooperative learning strategies. And so we often talk about team building and class building, in-person Kagan kinds of strategies. We've been talking about how we use, again, our video conferencing capabilities in small groups or even a large group. How do we do class building and team building virtually? We've also been talking about, and again, it will be something that we need the board to weigh in on, but I think all the principals would like the opportunity to at least bring in certain groups of kids at certain times, even if we're in a tier 3, if it can be done safely. Because we know that there are some kids, and they've also said to me, Roxana, and there's some people on this call, some of the teachers that I see that are on this call, we'll do porch visits. We will do whatever we think is allowable and safe to try to get those kinds of connections, because we know what you're saying is absolutely correct, that relationship building, that level of trust, that level of transparency in terms of being able to give good feedback and have kids receive it as helpful feedback instead of feeling it as criticism from this person I don't know. All of those things will have to happen.
And can I add, all of this is changing and new. We all know that. And I don't want you to feel what we're sharing is what we're limited to. I believe once we go back to the staff, especially once we know kind of where we're headed right now, that's where the ingenuity starts to kick in. When we kind of get a clear idea of what is safe, what are our parameters, what is comfortable for the board in terms of how we're going to move forward. I believe with all my heart that creativity and really trying to meet the needs of our students in the best way that we've done in the past, we can do it in this new reality.
I just want to say how excited I am to hear about the porch visits and that that's being discussed. I appreciate our teachers and our administrators so much because that is something where we are thinking, you all are thinking outside of the box. I say we because I've had community members also talk about like having something like porch visits for children that are extremely vulnerable and in need. And so to hear that's coming from the community, but that's also coming from our administrators and especially our teachers is a beautiful thing. So thank you so much. I wanted to kind of address something that Karen just said about like, you know, we're looking at everything now and now is the time for innovation. And I want to talk about like tier 2 and how we were talking about last meeting, we were talking about having our ECC through MRHE going in 5 days a week. And you'll have to forgive me. I need time to think on things. And so when we were talking about it, I was just like, but after having some days to think about it, it seems like tier 2 is equivalent to tier 1, which is like, well, we go back in and everything is normal, if you will, or a new normal. But still, we have so many children back in the classroom, and it would seem like tier 2 should really look like less children and not 5 days. And so I just kind of wanted to talk that out with you all and flesh that out. We're seeing some other districts that are doing like 2 days on, 3 days off, or if there are 24 students in a classroom, then it's, 12 on one day and then 12 on another day. So can we just talk about that a little more? Because really, like, that concerns me that tier 2, but we have a full classroom.
Well, so Roxanna, can I start a little bit?
Of course.
You can
Of course.
jump in. So we were going to talk about that.
We were.
Bringing it. You teed it up for me.
We can go back a slide now, Karen.
Great. So, yes, I would concur in terms of thinking about that and receiving feedback. And part of the feedback that I also received was from Spring. So in terms of that cohort approach, the blended approach, now that came from, and then Roxanna, you can jump in just a moment. We didn't make that up. That was some of the guidance that we read and was recommended for this age group at this time. But of course, things are changing and we need to change with our planning. So she can elaborate on this, kind of what we were thinking, just to reiterate it. But where I am right now, I feel that we need to tweak the blended approach for K6. I'm there now. Knowing everything that's going on, and then also for you, the board, to understand that really tier 2 is going to be the new normal. It's really not even a tier 1, because I don't even know what tier 1 would look like, how life is going to be when this is over, quote unquote. So we need to think for long periods of time that there's going to be this tier 2, tier 3 fluidity going back and forth between the two, because there's a lot of overlap with the virtual piece from tier 2 and tier 3. They share quite a bit. And so you, I think, made reference to what other districts are doing. They have been doing, we call it an AB. You have half the group on one day and the other half on the other day. We refer to it as like an AB schedule. And they've taken that approach in terms of dealing with blending. So I want to just immediately, before Roxanna goes into detail, is saying, yeah, I can't tell you exactly, but we are going to tweak it. We're going to make changes for that. Okay. So Roxana, do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, I do, because I think it's important, not only for the board, but for those of you that are watching to kind of know why we landed on the plan that we presented. We actually looked very carefully at the guidance that was coming out. One of so there are multiple layers of protection. So we are trying to look at the fact that no single layer is foolproof. So it's what you select and how you layer. So one of the things that we heard very early on was stable cohorts of children are super important. And by stable cohorts, I mean, if you can keep small groups of children that only have interaction with each other, right? So they are not commingling with other kids in the building. They're not in common areas. If you could do that, you could limit the spread of infection and you could allow contact tracing. Coupled with that guidance, the American Association of Pediatricians basically put out a guidance document that said really all young children need to be in school for many of the reasons we've already elaborated. They can't learn on their own. It's a critical time period for them in terms of social emotional development, literacy, numeracy, those things. So looking at that guidance, our plan was how can we create stable cohorts of kids who are on campus receiving instruction in periods of critical development so that we don't, create gaps or delays, and can we do that safely? So our strategy at that point was to create these cohorts, figure out how to get them in classrooms that were safe. We looked for bigger spaces where they could be. We created all kinds of plans so that they would not, for lack of a better word, cross-pollinate with other kids. That's not the right word, but in terms of germ spread, and then also, do we need physical barriers? What do we do? So we looked at, if that's the case, how do we get multiple layers of protection? And I would say up until about a week and a half ago, that was very consistent with guidance we're seeing. Now with the guidance that we're hearing that more young children may have a stronger infection rate. We heard Spring tonight, so I'm not gonna repeat that. I'm also gonna tell you that we've heard from the ECC staff, and they are also a little nervous about having that many kids in the building for all the reasons, that you've said. However, they are also nervous about every other day a week because young children can't stay by themselves. So if they are in daycares, if they are with grandma and grandpa, if they're with other folks, that's more potential to be in contact with other people that kind of impact the stable group piece. So there isn't necessarily a great solution for this age group, but we have heard the feedback. We are watching the numbers, which you saw are increasing. We have better information about young children, and we do need to tweak that plan in some way or another. So, well, I'm not going to say anything more about that at that time. That is something that we're looking at.
Okay. I gave that pause because I wanted to see if anyone else had a question. So I have another question. I want to jump back to tier 3 because I want parents, and if we have any students on the line, especially students that are in middle school, high school, I want them to know I am not solely focused on the little ones. We, the board, received emails from high school students. So first and foremost, thank you all for being advocates for yourselves. Truly, thank you. And so receiving those emails, I want to talk about their experience. I know that you explained to us that we have Zoom now. We'll be able to use Zoom. And there was one student that said that they had a very difficult time working by themselves and getting that motivation. And so my question is, like, how is Zoom going to be used? Is it going to be used like, okay, this class is starting at 9:15 a.m. and you can hop on to Zoom and you can have this live class. If you can't and something's going on, then you'll be able to go back to that class and look at that class later on in the day. And if you miss it, then someone's going to call you and say, hey, you missed the 9:15 class. Are you doing okay? Is it going to be used like that, or are you thinking of something else, Roxana?
There is no easy answer to your question. It absolutely can be used like that, and in some situations will. What we're trying to do is, again, think about the integrated package of lessons. So we've heard from about half the families that want the synchronous learning, where at 9 a.m. we're all here and there's a method of instruction. And we've heard from about half of the families and students saying, I need to be able to do this on my own time. So again, we've purchased equipment that will allow better recording of lessons. The guidance that we talked about in so far is that we should be providing those live training lessons with consistency so that folks can check in and be together, but we also have to provide alternatives. So that might be live streaming of courses and recording and posting the recording. I don't want to bore you to death. There are six or seven virtual, there are 6 or 7 virtual structures we can use. There's a centers model, there's a flipped model. So we're going through all these models, and I think that teachers as our MRH teachers often do, they are going to have the flexibility to pick the models that work the best with the content deliverables that they are going for, because not all of those models work equally well with certain kinds of content. So I think what I'm saying to you, Nikki, is we would expect, so what we've told them we expect is some direct instruction. We expect some social interaction. We expect feedback. And so there are all these areas that have to be packaged together in lesson segments so that kids get a really deep integrated experience that as much as possible models. It won't be exactly what they would get if they were in person with teachers, but the same components that are essential will be delivered virtually through a wide variety of formats, if that answers your question.
I believe it does. I think I just want to really emphasize that the board has heard from students as well as teachers and families and parents, and they are adamant that they want the MRH education because our education in this district has social justice embedded in it, has equity embedded in it, and so they want to make sure that they're getting what they sought out when they came to the MRH school district. And so I think that the plan that you all are working through now is trying to make sure that we have that. And I hope that, just going forward, that we'll consistently think like, okay, equity, social justice, like this is embedded into the in-person education that our children get. And so we're going to make sure to continue that if we have to be in a virtual platform.
I think we're all on that page. We're all trying to make sure MRH is still MRH.
Awesome.
Along those lines, Roxana, can you speak a little bit to the specific supports for teachers and staff that you've investigated and we're going to try to put together in this model? I mean, there's a lot of tools, there's a lot of new stuff. I'm sure there's a lot of anxieties. I think one of the strengths of our staff is peer learning and sharing best practices and being able to interact. Again, I'm very intrigued by the idea of safely using the building to have some in-person if it's desired and if it's safe and folks are there. But I know you guys have looked at some staff supports. Can you talk a little bit more about what that looks like in order to motivate and keep our spirits up of our staff to be able to deliver this stuff to our families?
Right. Well, so we've got staff supports happening in a wide variety of ways. First and foremost, we will be doing lots of training and conversations around distance learning, and we are paying staff members to serve as those distance learning coaches so that they are well immersed and in teams. So you heard me talk about that. I won't talk about that anymore. We are continuing to support a wide variety of professional development that help teachers with very specific content pieces virtually. And also that help us with, you're aware we just did a socially distanced Kagan training, for example. So for the time when we come back, we wanted to learn how to do that in ways that would support that would support teachers and students in a safe way. We are investing in technology. So you heard me talk about swivels. I could start naming different programs. We're going to have to spend a lot of money on the school's PLP that give us multiple options for virtual learning add-ons as well as self-paced coursework. We are doing things like helping teachers find specific programs that help with foreign language. Part of the school's PLP can translate into 47 different languages. So that's super helpful in terms of what we were hearing with ESL students and their needs. There is a speech to text or a text to speech functionality in that. So that assistive technology also has to happen. You asked specifically about teachers, but principals have been having team meetings and staff meetings. Throughout the closure, we had, every other day calls. We did specific It's Learning training. The tech department did training videos. All of those things have happened and will continue to happen. Part of what has made this incredibly challenging for staff is that things are changing. And so, every day I feel like I've erred one side or the other. We don't want to get folks all spun up and then, oh, we're not doing that, never mind. On the other hand, you don't want to give people training in advance so that they can't prepare. So coming to every time we get something solid, then we spin that up and roll that out. We're also trying to listen really well to staff in terms of what they need. And they have been very thoughtful and very forthcoming in terms of what they need. On the HR side, I will tell you the emerging need, which is new, that I haven't heard quite so much, is they want to have a lot of information about, for lack of a better term, what does contact tracing looks like, and what happens if one of us gets sick, and what kinds of leave are available to us. That's all information that we have shared. We will continue to share. I'm working on staff handbooks because in an age where everything's uncertain, the more that we can be certain about, the more confident that we feel. And so I can tell you that Karen and I have returned every staff email. I've had folks come and sit with us one-on-one to ask questions. We have met with our teacher leader group and our support leader groups. I really think that that's what we have to do. We have to have dialogue. We have to listen. As needs become available, we have to provide the training and the resources that they need. And I feel like in most instances that is happening. I think we have some areas where needs are not quite yet completely understood, and that will be something we continue to monitor and tweak and grow as we move forward.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So if we go back to tier 2, as we have talked about, I don't know, that the multiple layers of protection is something that is probably on the forefront of the principals' minds. And because it's the new normal, I think Spring said it right. This is something we have to practice. This is something that we have to experience. I will tell you that I have been in now more than a couple different forums where that is actually working in educational settings. And so my comfort level is up a bit when I see what it looks like when we wear masks and when we are 6 feet apart and when we have plexiglass barriers and when we have markers on the ground where folks stand and we have hand washing stations and all of those things in play. But that is going to take practice with our staff. That's going to take practice with students, just like the virtual learning takes practice to get used. So we're still thinking about that. And honestly, I can't say enough times, there isn't one single thing that's going to do it for us. And what makes this so hard is every individual person has the thing that's super important to them. For some people, it's temperature checks. For some people, it's masks. For some people, it's 6 feet, all of the being outside, having fresh air, all of those are important. It's the combination of things that we use in the environment that we intend to use them that becomes important. What those layers look like in a PE classroom where there's lots of physical activity may look very different in a small group conference room where there's only going to be a few kids for a short period of time. So we're trying to think through every space. We've had architects walk. I'm walking again on Monday with folks who do the barriers so that we can have, I'm walking with all the principals. We've already walked once for furniture placement and any furniture repurchase. We're walking on Monday to look at the physical barriers and what might be needed. For example, one of the things we heard from ECC families is the small group instruction and the teacher tables. Like, is there a way that we could do that safely so that a student could sit across from a teacher and we could do the things that we normally do and that are important that be done? So we're doing all of that on Monday. Mike Wieland has cleaning plans that he has delivered in terms of exactly when will things be done, how will they be done, what kinds of disinfectants do we have, what is the kill time on the virus. So we've got specialized packs that we can spray down a bus between routes that will kill those germs in 2 minutes flat. So all of these are things that I do want everybody that's listening to understand that we are not taking lightly, and we are methodically going through them. And every time we get new guidance or every time we hear new scientific data that comes out, we have to go back and rethink and work through the list again. I was talking to Kat Norton today. I said, it's a lot like putting together a jigsaw puzzle and getting almost all the way to the end and realizing you got a piece in the wrong space. And then you got to go find that piece, take it out, and realign it. So when we think about a tier 2 and bringing kids back, we have to watch the data. You heard Spring, but we also can't even think about doing that until we have all of these layers of protection set with protocols in place for how they're being used. So I do want you to know we're working on that. And part of the reason why you heard so much about that in our last presentation was because this is an area that's all new. This is an area that requires a lot of thought, which is where your principals have primarily been putting a lot of their efforts in terms of the physical layout of the building. And this is something that costs money. We have to have cleaning supplies. We have to have signage. We have to have, you know, the wayfinding. We have to have the barriers. We have to have the PPE.
Yeah. So can I interject real quick? And lots of layers. As you can tell, it's pretty extensive, all the things that we have to consider. Physical things that we need to change, but there's also human behavior, the practice piece, which is huge. And just as she was saying before, adults really transmit to one another quite a bit. So we have to make sure that we're vigilant in our human behaviors, and we just have to change the way we think, and we don't go to work not feeling well. We have to change that whole mental model. There's a lot for just ourselves and how we conduct ourselves. So again, just to emphasize, yes, this one is our new reality and requires a lot of time and effort because it's a lot of change when we're in there together in some capacity. So we don't want to abandon this or think it's not any longer important, because we see that really tier 3 is our reality because of the outbreak that's happening right now. You know, we're going to make sure that 3 is well planned and is executed as best as, you know, the MRH way will, but we can't forget about 2 because we may pivot there quick. We have no idea when, but we have to watch closely. Spring is lovely. She's here to support us along the way to figure out, okay, is it time? Is it going to be tier 2? And I want to make sure, and I'm sure we will be when the time comes, ready for tier 2 when the time comes.
Karen, I appreciate that. I mean, I think it's important to restate that what the health experts seem to be recommending to us is that the end of August is a virtual start. We obviously have to agree to that here, and sooner rather than later for planning purposes. I think that absolutely we need to continue to think about tier 2, and I would maybe challenge slightly though the idea that we would have to shift between a 3 to a 2 quickly. I think that opportunity to practice and to kind of try things on could look, again, some really interesting ways. I think, again, this is where your school board should be deployed to be advocates at the state level if this is, if we're worried about, but we counted them in class on Friday, and we need to count them in class in person on Monday for, some arbitrary attendance number. This community clearly will rally to advocate for, what's right for our kids and community. So I agree. Let's not abandon tier 2. Let's also recognize that we can continue to tweak and improve and shift that tier 2 for many more weeks here, because the future is looking cautious right now.
Well, and one of the things I would say, Katie, I think you're right, but if we're in a tier 3 and we're bringing any people in the building at all, we still have to be practicing these tier 2 protocols, right? And we might do that on limited basis or trial bases, but those things have to be in place. And many of them already are. We've had staff in the buildings now since June. We brought a few more staff members back in July. So we've been rolling people back in a phased approach. And every time we bring a new group in, we practice the adult protocols. I envision our tier 3 will have some opportunities, again, if the board agrees, to practice with our staff that has been off for the summer back on campus, and also, maybe small groups of students if we believe that their particular circumstances really require some one-on-one interaction. So I think this will continue to be something that we look at, but I do want to stress that those are things that there's been a lot of activity and a lot of planning and a lot of thought process around what do we do, what does the guidance say, and every time it changes, we backtrack to figure out how we address what we now know that we didn't know then. So I do want to point that out. What I want to say about the blended learning environments is everything you heard in tier 3, we also have to think about in tier 2. So even when we're back in person, we want to make sure that those virtual elements are in place, because kids need to practice, because when they have to be gone, they're still going to have to use those pieces. Because, as Brandy, you said, it's more things that we have for kids to go back to, and the more different types of resources they have, the better we are to catch students. And also because if we're in a tier 2 setting, and even if it's flu season, the guidance used to be you're out for 24 hours if you have a fever. It's now 72 hours. I don't know what it might be in the future. If a student has someone in their family who has COVID, they're going to be out for at least 14 days. So even in a tier 2, if there is any disease in the community, then it's very possible, well, even in regular school, let's forget COVID, where we were, on any given day, some of our kids are not with us. So we want to make sure that blended learning is available for all of the reasons that I just said. So we know that blended means we are sometimes in person and we are sometimes virtual, and that package has to be integrated and it has to work as a good instructional flow. Okay, so that's why I wanted to start with 3. Everything I said with 3 also is important in 2.
Roxana, I think you bring up a good point about, I guess just what 3 looks like. And I understand that there's a possibility for children to come into the school that's what it may look like to you. I will say that to me, tier 3, we don't have children coming into the school, but that's just me. For me, when you said that there were some teachers that were talking about porch visits, that's what tier 3 looks like to me. where you can social distance and we can have our teachers with PPE, going to visit children that need that additional assistance, that those teachers are like, okay, yes, we're going to do this. So I think we probably need to have a discussion on tier 3 and what that looks like, because for me, it's what I just explained. So.
I agree. I mean, I don't want to be the one to make that decision, and obviously we have to be comfortable with the decisions that we're making. I, right, wrong, or indifferent, am more comfortable sometimes because I can control, at least to the best that we can, the environment at school. We know that it's disinfected. We know, under certain parameters, I think porch visits are safe. We just have to put some shape around what we're sending people out to do, regardless of what the environment is. We have to be very comfortable that the conditions are correct and appropriate, and that everybody knows what the ground rules and the boundaries are. So
I appreciate you want to have a conversation, because I think we're getting to that point now where we know where we're heading because we really have been uncertain for so long that we can start really innovating and coming up with ideas on how to wrap around all of our kids as much as possible and be creative in this virtual environment. So I appreciate you asking those questions, because we're going to start asking those questions of ourselves as well.
I would like to pivot, if I could, to social emotional supports. Okay. In a tier 2 environment for students, this is a little easier because we see them at least part of the time in person. And we are able to know a little bit more about them. We have a little more contact. We have a little more, some of the normal functions that teachers do just are easier in person, quite honestly. But we still need social emotional support. We still have to follow up on kids who aren't here on virtual days. So many of the things we talked about in 3 are also very important in 2. But what becomes more important in 2 than it was in 3 is our supports for teachers. We have staff members who have health concerns. We have staff members who have family members who have health concerns. And so part of what we think about, and part of what we're already doing when we have social emotional supports for teachers, is we are reaching out to staff to, for those that have known health conditions, we've reached out to say, here's what we know, please be in contact with us if there are any additional assistance you need beyond what we already have in place for you. For general staff, we've just basically, presented information and asked them to let us know if there are any additional supports that they might need. And they are doing that. And I'm in the process of walking through options with different teachers. We use an interactive process when we have known health concerns that they have disclosed, and otherwise, we move forward. I'm getting a lot of questions, general questions about how things work and how sick leave works. And so that's super, super important. But I will tell you that just like in our general community, our teaching staff have, lots of things going on with them, and they are going to need a lot of additional support. Even if they don't have, exceptional things going on, what we're asking them to do and what we're getting ready to ask them to do in both a tier 3 and a tier 2 environment is hard, and it is new. So we are anticipating that there will be lots of additional need for staff morale building in terms of, we talk about kids and team building and class building. We have to continue to do that for our staff. I'm thinking right now, like a hallmark of MRH is our big opening day celebration. Mm-hmm. We can't all be together, but we still have to figure out a way to meet that function, right? Because we still want to be MRH for our staff, just like we still want to be MRH for our students.
Yes.
And so I just want you to know all of those things are in motion as well. I feel like, teachers need to know that they're seen and they're heard and they're valued. So we're reading every comment, we're returning every email to the best that we can, but this is going to be an ongoing need. And tier 2, in many ways, is also stressful for our staff members because they are also parents whose kids might not be able to go to school every day. you know, I don't want to keep going on and on about that, but I do think that is something we're looking at in addition to social emotional supports for kids.
There's a
We
lot
all-
of continuous, planning and tweaking that we need to do. I want to be completely transparent about that because it is a very complex tier.
So can I also kind of speak to that and then ask some questions about that social emotional support? I think our focus is on teachers right now, right, Roxana?
We're doing it for students and teachers, but since I had already talked about students in tier 3 and tier 2's a little bit easier, I mostly wanted to make my comments here about staff.
Okay, and that's, yeah, no problem. So I again appreciate our community like stepping up to help us be innovative during this time. And so I received some suggestions from a very intelligent and loving community member. And one was like, you know, could we get the behavioral health hotline sent out to every household, and that would include our teachers as well. I know that we're focusing on teachers and our students, but I also want to focus on our families as well, because this is stressful for them as well. And we are a community and we're doing this in solidarity with each other. And then also, is there a possibility that we can offer virtual counseling for our teachers should they be in need of that?
That's a great question, Nikki.
Okay.
We have a couple, we have multiple avenues through our benefits package that we offer our teachers. So we have an employee helpline, and the helpline is a number that we distribute that can help teachers instantly in a wide variety of ways. And that in terms of counseling specifically, that's usually temporary counseling, it's crisis counseling. They offer counselors to help folks with chronic health conditions that will kind of be their coach as they work through those conditions. But the goal in the crisis counseling is to help them locate a more long-term solution that would then move over. And in most conditions, you know, at least there's some support through our healthcare plan. So yes, that is part of our benefits package. We have been sending that number out periodically throughout the closure. I haven't done it as much recently in the summer because we've not been in the throes of it, but yes, that's something we do. And I do think the suggestion of our student services team, making sure that all of our community resources are going regularly to families is a good one.
And I want to stress also, we've been saying teachers in particular, but it includes all staff.
Correct.
And these
Correct.
resources and all of outreach that Roxana's been doing, it's all staff. So I just want to make sure the board and also the community knows there's no difference. It's all of us together.
Can I talk about, or I want to ask about our social workers. I feel like at this time, it's kind of like we should just be like, okay, activate and go. So how are we going to be using our social workers to assist our students? Because the emails that we're receiving from our high school students are concerning. I mean, they're letting us know this is difficult for us. This is affecting our mental well-being, our emotional well-being. And if it's happening to our older students in the middle school and high school, it's definitely happening to our little ones. And so how are we using our social workers to address the social emotional needs of our students, all of our students?
Well, looks like, I'll start, and Roxanne and I'll be in tandem with that, but you know, it's a team with our counselors as well. It's not just our social workers. So it's a larger group that we're looking at. And I know that Vince is working closely with them and building administrators with any reports of any concerns about the students at this point in time. But I know they're going to be very strategic in their action. We need to know who the students are as well. And that's one of the concerns that have been said over and over again, that some of our students that we were worried about in the fourth quarter, we were worried about them because we no longer had contact with them. So I'm going to be completely honest, that's going to be one of the first challenges that we have, is making sure that we can get a hold of some of our students that we're worried about. And I don't know, Roxana, you wanted to add on?
I see Vince is no longer on the call, so I really wish he were here to answer, because I know what I was going to say is I know he has been consistently meeting with teams of people And also, we have a social emotional action team that Megan Boyer has been leading. I know they have been meeting consistently to look at that. But I also wanted to make the same point Karen made. It's really a team of people. So we do have social workers, but we also have counselors. We also have in every building and at the secondary level, a team of 5 who are specialized teachers that work in our social emotional programming, and they operate as a team. There are leadership groups. In the younger grades, we call them child study teams. They operate under different names at the secondary, but there are dedicated groups of people that meet on a regular basis to look at students' needs, most times in partnership with their parents, trying to bring every bit of information that we have to the table to make sure that we have good educational plans. We write specific plans for them and document what we're trying and what the outcomes are. So that process will continue. I know at our last meeting, we talked about the fact that we couldn't find some kids, and that is true. I went to the principals as a follow-up, and they showed me pages, just all kinds of the things they've tried and what they've tried. So I do want the board to know that our folks are all in. They are doing their best to find people, to reach people, and to make this work. So I'm not saying everything is rosy. I've already explained why this is difficult, but I do want to assure you that we're hearing the same feedback. And that is something that the staff is very concerned about and are all in. So there are multiple teams who are working on that. It's not just up to the social workers. There's a whole group. And I think Vince would say, if he were here, that we also have great community partners. So we have youth in need counselors. We have, and I could name all of them and I'll leave somebody out, but we have a whole community of partners that work in our schools with our kids in conjunction with us, with parent permission, and that will also continue.
Well, and I would love to follow up with Vince, though, to be more specific about the work, the strategic planning that they're doing, knowing what happened in fourth quarter, what we learned from that, just like she was talking about, they're all in. Well, but what are you doing? So
that's my question, Karen. So I appreciate Roxanna's explanation, but really that is my question. So thank you, Karen.
Yeah, so I hear what you're saying, and work is being done, but he's not here, unfortunately. He was here for most of it, but we can follow up with that because that's been part of the how we had to mobilize after all this happened. That's one component of it. So please don't think we've forgotten. It's just, unfortunately, he is not the administrator here, to elaborate on it. And you know how wonderful he is. He will be able to expound on that later.
And I want you to know, I don't think that you all have forgotten about it. This is just me inquiring, like, okay, so what's happening? But I don't think you all have forgotten about anything. So
no, unfortunately, we're not the ones that are leading those teams, so I can't give you the level of specificity that I normally do.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
The last thing that I wanted to talk about, I think, is staffing in a tier 2. So one of the things we know that we will need in a tier 2 when we are thinking that we are coming back in this blended or hybrid model with some kids on campus is we do have some additional staffing requirements that are in play. So we believe, and they have not given me their final recommendations of what that looks like, but we believe that we will need a few more custodians. Just because the frequency of cleaning needs to be much greater than it currently is, particularly around lunches. We believe that we may need a part-time bus driver because in order to get, if we do one student to a seat and we assume the ridership that folks have reported, we're going to need to run perhaps an additional route, and they're working on those numbers. We also believe that we are going to need some TA support. Sorry, I don't know who's calling me, but I don't need to talk to them right now. We'll need some TA support to help us with supervision. And so that is, again, to get greater social distancing and to help us have more adults to remind students of the layers of protection protocols, particularly in what have been situations that are harder to supervise: arrival, dismissal, cafeteria, where there are maybe larger numbers of students and fewer numbers of staff members to man all the different places that kids could be. So we have set aside money in the budget for that. And principals have already begun to look at that, and I have a pretty good idea of what their preferences are. But I do want you to know that, you know, one of the things that we do have to think about in a tier 2 is we have a slightly higher staffing need. It's not exorbitant or ridiculous, but to do all the things we say we're doing as layer protections in a tier 2, we are going to need a few more bodies.
Thank you, Roxana. Any other questions? Great questions tonight. Thank you so much. Okay, so just briefly, we want to, or not me, Roxana.
Right, so we're not actually closing the survey until Tuesday. So I don't want to go through all the results, nor do I think that you want to put yourself through that again. But we do have some preliminary numbers. So I can tell you that as of today, around noon, we had 791 parents who took the survey compared to 679 that took it the first time. So we actually have over 100 more folks who took the time to give us information this time. Our staff survey numbers are at 199, and we only have slightly over 200 employees. So at this point, almost every employee has taken the survey, which is great. And we ask a lot of things, so I'm not going to go through a lot of things. I'm just going to say that, you know, one of the numbers I was looking at was who wants to come back in a tier 1, who wants to come back in a tier 2, who wants to come back in a tier 3. When we gave the survey the first time, we had about 65% of parents that said that they wanted to come back on campus in some way, shape, or form. This time we had 56% of parents that said that they wanted to start in a face-to-face option. So that is fewer than we had the time before. We had 44% of parents that told us in this particular survey that they prefer to keep their kids home or in a virtual format until, you know, the virus is no more. So that kind of gives us some ideas. That 44% is larger than the 37% we heard from last time. So our numbers have shifted as we predicted that they would. Teachers are 50-50. So last time they were 55-44. This time it's a 50-50 split of teachers that told us they would like to start in some in-person format, either tier 1 or tier 2, and 50% said they wanted to start virtually. So you can see that, you know, people are unsure. I think that speaks to the heart of folks and how they all want to do what is best. We're just not 100% sure all the time what that exactly means and for whom it means at any given time. So just those are the numbers we have. We've got a lot of other data I've got to dig through once we close that survey, and I'll be able to tell you more at a later date and also send you that raw data so you can digest it yourself.
Any questions? Again, it is preliminary, but we just wanted you to have a general idea.
I don't have any questions, but I just kind of want to let you all know that it's a conflict for me. You know, I understand that we need to hear from our community because we are in this together. It is about solidarity. On the other hand, we also need to look at science for me.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, we are being asked to make a decision that for me is involving life or death. And so for me, I'm always going to look at what the science is telling us. I'm going to look at what, you know, spring is, you know, presenting to us, because I need to be in a place 20 years from now when I'm like, I made a hard decision, but I made a decision to make sure that everyone was safe. And so I guess I just want to let Roxana and Karen, I want to let you all know, like, I appreciate you all getting this data asking our community, because once again, I believe in solidarity and making sure that everyone is heard. But then I also want you to understand what I'm thinking, me personally, and what I'm carrying. And I need folks to live for real. I just do. So I'm gonna go on mute before I get a little misty eyed and
No, it's all good. I appreciate you speaking your truth. As I think Wes said earlier, I think that's very important. But we are in this together, and giving people an opportunity to share where they are, because things are changing. We have to understand that as well, because it's changing rapidly right now. And Spring did a great job of really explaining the issue around metrics, and also about how things are changing and with younger students. I mean, it's not what it was in May. Most definitely it's changed 2 weeks ago. So it's the nature of this now is that we constantly have to watch it, and we need to be in a position where we prepare for different scenarios so we can respond to them, to the situation that we're living in, so we can give them the best education possible. Ralph, were you saying something?
No, I was just gonna. I'm sorry, I talked over the end of what you were saying there, Karen. But
Oh, that's okay.
I was just going to point out that it would be interesting to see. I'm not suggesting we do this, but I just as a thought process for people to put in their minds. After Spring's discussion tonight, how does that affect the survey questions which were answered essentially over the last 10 days? Because I'm thinking that it's possible we would even see another iteration of movement.
Yeah.
Possible.
I think that just speaks to how fast this is transpiring and how the information is flowing, and ultimately, I mean, we've got the responsibility of utilizing our best judgment on something like this. So it's an interesting data. It's definitely an interesting data point. I appreciate the information. I appreciate the teacher sentiment information as well. It's a multifaceted approach, but and it's rapidly changing.
Yeah. And I like what you said. It's multifaceted, and there's multiple data points that we have to consider. Just like Spring was stating for her world, she's looking at a lot of information, including personal narratives. She shared with me, we talked for quite a bit, just the personal stories and the experiences. So it helps her with her leadership and policy making as well, like meeting with the superintendents and hearing about our frustration with trying to lead and guide. So it's complicated. I wish it was just one data point or two. I mean, it's multiple things, and we have to use our best judgment and do what's best for the community, which leads me to this slide. So this is not necessarily a tonight thing, but I wanted to put some shape around all of this because it's big. There's a lot that's going on, but we have to, you have to decide, how are we going to start the year? Where do you want to start? And then here was an idea, and Maria's not here, but I want to, give credit to some of the brainstorming she had a week ago about modifying the school calendar, delay the start. I think we should have a full-blown conversation around that, because I see some benefits to that, especially if we start virtual, some creative ideas. I don't really want to unfold all that because it's late. I really want to, give it some time and talk to other folks as well. But
say comfortably that I am ready to address the issue of when we start.
I agree.
Say that again.
I said I can say comfortably for myself that I am ready to discuss the issue of when school starts, and what tier, if my other colleagues are willing to do that tonight. I think we're prepared to do that part at least tonight.
We are prepared to do that.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate that we're on a very tight timeline. I mean, I do worry with Maria not present that this is one of the more momentous votes, I think, in the history of this district, and I feel it important that we have all 7 voices heard in some capacity. I also think even though I think there's not a lot of disagreement about where we are with this, I really feel like we need to understand the budget implications of what this looks like. Not that it would necessarily change the conversation or change the outcome, but I think it's important that we at least understand what that looks like as we look into the next quarter and semester of the school year, because I think those are staffing conversations. Those are other general budget implications, and I think it's the ramifications. We have to look at that. I think.
And Francis, I don't disagree with you, but I thought that's what we were supposed to in part be doing tonight. When Maria brought up last week, what about a delayed start? Then we all came to the consensus of having tonight's meeting to address the issues that were brought up at the last meeting, no?
I also think that we need to make a decision tonight regarding the tier that we're going to start in, as well as, you know, when we are going to start, because we're starting to get parents that are saying we need to know what's happening so we can plan accordingly. I do not think that we should wait any longer to make at least those two decisions so our community members can start to plan. And I'm definitely not trying to do all of this without Maria. So I don't want you to think that. I don't want anybody to think that. But I'm just telling you all, like, we have community members telling us we need to know what we're going to do so we can plan. And time is of the essence.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've heard a couple of times from Roxana around the desire to get to some certainty, as much as certainty as possible for our teachers' sake. Frankly, those are the folks that I'm most concerned about laying awake for the next month, planning 6 different scenarios when we could relieve some of that uncertainty this evening.
So, would there be any consideration of maybe next week, like once the survey closed? What are your thoughts about that?
Again, I think that the survey information is an interesting data point. I am not going to be making my decision based primarily on the wishes of folks who desperately want life to go back to normal, and it just is normal right now.
Yeah, and I think that as compelling as issues regarding budget are, I don't really think that we're in a position. We're just going to have to deal with whatever budget inflations come along. I mean, whether we're going to have to deal with it. So I don't know that there's necessarily, based on the budget, a reason to delay this decision. Unfortunately, it would be nice to have Maria's input tonight. That's not possible, but we have a quorum, and I do actually think we probably ought to try and get our parents and our staff the direction they need to move forward without living in 3 or 4 different worlds right now. That's what I think.
And I thought we also discussed the budget and the place that we're at with it last week, and how this day, we didn't know this day literally was coming, but we have been so budget conscious for a reason, and we're in a position that a lot of districts are not in, to be able to have some room in the budget to add these things that we desperately need.
I would defer to this administration as far as where the budget conversation is. I mean, have numbers, or are there things, without going into specifics on, you know, staffing and things that are essentially more executive session items? I mean, is there anything that you want to mention around that in order to address that, or am I incorrect in thinking that that consideration number is any different since last week?
Chris?
So the budget implications for an extending the virtual instruction through, let's say, a semester are significant. Beyond that, extending the school year by delaying the start is also a huge budget implication beyond what we've really done the calculation on. So I've roughly tried to do that, but I need to dig in a little bit more into our system and position control to produce that. But what I can tell you is if we were to need to remain in a virtual environment, the revenue losses, if we were to cancel our fee-based programs and reduce our foundation formula revenue as a result of no longer being able to claim our preschool students, the loss of food service sales would total roughly about $640,000. And of course, that number would scale up or down based on the length of the closure and how quickly we could bring those fee-based services back in. And of course, as Roxana indicated earlier, there is space to recapture or find some savings. If the students aren't on site, there may be some places where we were able to offset some of those losses. If just rough numbers again, if we were to remain closed for one semester and we made no adjustments on the expenditure side of our budget, that would drop our ending operating fund balance to right around 35.5%. It's currently budgeted to be 38.3. If the unthinkable happened and we were to take that out to 2 full semesters, that would take us to 32.9% on an operating fund balance. So it's not that first year that I would necessarily be concerned with. It would be the subsequent years. And again, we have sufficient fund balance to absorb this. We just, that pot of money, that cash reserve isn't infinite. So we just have to keep a close eye on it and make good decisions.
Thanks, Chris. That's helpful. I appreciate that. I think that was an important aspect of our jobs as school board members that need to be at least in the consideration.
I can crank out those percentages would obviously be lower. I think we could find some creative ways to perhaps extending the school year would mean extending the teacher contract. So again, I have to run those numbers, but it would be a significant increase to that number that I just stated, which is at 640,000. So again, I can get that number and shoot that out to you tomorrow.
Delaying start doesn't necessarily mean extending the school year. So I just want to point that out, that those are really two separate questions. Both have merit, but one has a budget implication and one may or may not, depending on what we decide to do.
Correct.
I also did want to say to you, because I've been talking about the technology resourcing we need to make virtual work. That price tag, in case you're interested, is about $150,000 to $160,000. And that sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money, but that's about the number we were thinking we would have to spend in tuition for 30% of our students if they chose all virtual. In this way, we cover all of our kids. So if we think about it that way, it's actually a pretty good number for us.
So yeah, I mean, I think taking at least this first point is relevant this evening. I, could entertain the idea of a delayed start. I mean, I think Karen and Roxana, this also just goes to what expectations look like in a virtual environment too are different than expectations in an in-person environment, and acknowledging that the first day of school may not be a firing on all cylinders in the way that, you know, bright-eyed children normally would want to. So just again, I think this is as much for the benefit of our type A students and you know, anxious parents and committed educators that the new normal, as we have mentioned several times this evening, doesn't necessarily mean business as usual. So,
Madam President,
yes.
I would like to call for a vote. May I make a motion?
Well, we need to amend the agenda because we don't have a vote on the agenda at all. So I need a motion to adjourn, to amend the agenda.
Move to amend the agenda to include a vote regarding the tier for beginning the 2020-2021 school year.
Thank you, Nikki.
Second.
Thank you, Brandy. All those in favor say aye.
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 I have a question on the start of the school year. Is there any other teacher reps or any other kind of administration that we need to speak with in terms of changing that date? Is there anything else that needs to happen? I'm just wondering about the ability of that change.
Right, and yes, I believe we need to have some conversation because we haven't talked about how much of a delay yet. I would like to bring some thinking back to you all, some recommendations as to what exactly is that delay. Because I thought we would discuss it and not necessarily vote right now because we have some more work to do as staff. But I think with what we're trying to do right now with this tier that we're going into, more time would be helpful, but how much and what day, and then working with folks, we have not done that. I just wanted to know what the appetite was on the board's end for doing this. So I don't have any other backup for that right now. So I agree, yes, I do need to do that.
So I'm confused because I thought that's what one of the things that we were doing today, because though I appreciate Roxana delving deep into this, we had a lot of these conversations a week ago. So today was to address what are we gonna do? We need to make some decisions, and it's sounding like we're not ready to do that. So I'm just.
Well, I can't say that exactly, Brandy. This is something totally different, delaying the start of school year. Like I was working on the tier piece and the metrics. I mean, this was a week ago. I just wanted to know, are you all interested in doing this? And I can do and get the work done to do that. Cause she mentioned maybe 2 weeks. And I don't know if that's exactly a good amount of time or a week or whatnot, because we didn't even talk about that.
Okay, so I'd like to propose then that we actually have recommendations from the administration as quickly as possible on points 2, 3, 4 here. And we do, though, vote on what tier we're beginning the school year in.
That I'd be comfortable with.
And for just for like the record point of order, that's what my motion was about. It is only for the tier. It was not. We're not including when the start of the school year was going to be.
Okay. All right.
I'm comfortable with that because I really feel like since Marie is not here, she should be a part of this whole process. And we've gotten a lot more information tonight than we had a week ago. So I kind of would like to get more information from the survey too to make a final decision on most of these steps.
All right, so can I have a motion on the tier that we're beginning the school year in?
I seconded the motion already.
Do we have a motion on it?
We need a motion. We need
For the
someone to make a
actual
motion
tier.
for the
Right.
tier.
Move to start the 2020-2021 school year in tier 3, that is the virtual option.
Second.
Second.
Thank you, Nikki, Brandy, and Wes. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Maria is not here because of a family emergency, so we will note her absence. I know that we have a few other items for executive session. So could I have a motion then to move into that?
Give me a moment. I move to enter into executive session in accordance with section 610.021, subsection 2, and section 610.022 of the revised statutes of Missouri on July 23rd, 2020 for the following specific reasons: real estate matters.
Second.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Wes. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you, community. Well, thank you, Cindy. We'll see y'all in executive session here.
Everybody.
Okay.